have never spoken on this topic, though I did submit comments through an intermediary on June 27th. My comments asked that no greenhouse gas emissions should come from this property. And I'm glad to see that Councillor McCabe and Councillor Burback have both taken that issue. And that each and every parking space had provision for charging facilities. I don't believe that they've done that. I understand there will be one. I don't know if there'll be more than one, but if there are 300 cars and one charging station, that's not going to cut it. And that the noise wall be built to satisfy the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and CN's concern that this development is 263 meters too close to an active rail yard. The provincial policy statement requires, this is from CN itself, the provincial policy statement requires that a needs and alternatives test be completed. That assessment was not provided, and I don't believe it was done. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Rail Association of Canada guidelines note that sensitive uses, i.e. housing, should be prohibited 300 meters away from the property line of a freight rail yard. The developer says that CN Rail is 117 meters from the site. CN says the distance is actually 37 meters. And they asked the question, who's right? They didn't get an answer, as far as I know. CN also asked what was an air quality and odor study conducted. There was an air and dust analysis only, based on desktop observations, curbside observations, and experience with similar entities. CN Rail's main focus is on impacts from noise and vibration. Adverse effects from odor are a land use planning consideration for the applicant. Where's the study? CN asked these questions and then said, if they have satisfactorily dealt with the concerns that they raised, then a development agreement securing any required noise, vibration, and air quality mitigation will be required to be executed prior to approval, i.e. prior to the zoning bylaw being adopted or enacted by council. That's what CN said. Then CN also said, should the development satisfy the concerns above, an easement agreement with respect to emissions from CN Rail will be required to be executed prior to approval, i.e. prior to the zoning bylaw being adopted or enacted by council. I don't know, CN is an eminent domain entity, and so they tend to rule the roost, and they can't be zoned. They can't be subservient to a provincial or a municipal government. So I'm not sure if by saying that, they're talking through their hat, or if they're pointing you in a very strong direction that there needs to be a couple of agreements signed before you vote on this bylaw. As far as I know, there were no such agreements presented to council as part of the application. Indeed, the planning report seems to suggest that since CN hasn't sent them a letter since May the 9th, they must agree with the development. I don't know how you come to that conclusion. They write on May the 9th, here's our problems. The developer writes back on May the 18th. That's not part of the public record. I haven't seen that. I don't know whether the developer said, yes, we'll sign a development agreement, and yes, we'll sign an easement agreement, and whether those have been done. But what planning has told you is that CN never responded. What does that mean? Does that mean that all of a sudden they're okay? If you don't have a letter from them, go ask. Go get it. I asked in my presentation on June 27th that no fossil fuels be used to heat this development. Somehow that got turned into that I was asking to heat the project with ground source and solar panels, which is not what I said. I have discovered from personal experience that heat pumps are now the same price as a furnace, as a gas furnace, and run for the same cost. Why anybody would put in a gas furnace today is beyond me, because within the next few years, you're gonna have to change it out anyway, because Canada has said it's not gonna use fossil fuels anymore. So are you hamstringing the owners of in the future to have to pay for another heat source rather than putting it in correctly the first time around? I mean, ultimately, that's something that a buyer might have to pay attention to, but it's here in front of you as well. The issue of noise from the rail yard was dealt with apparently through a noise study that was conducted for the developer. The noise study came to the conclusion that trying to mitigate the noise by putting up a noise barrier would probably not work, but they didn't actually examine it. They didn't actually try and imitate what it would be like. They have said that for those living in the very tall building, the noise will be much worse because there's no mitigation whatsoever. So much so that any rooftop amenity will have to have a noise wall built because it will be too loud up there for anybody to even think. The noise study suggested that because the noise is greater than is permitted by law, that anybody wanting to buy in this building has to know that they have to put in their own air conditioning. I don't know if the planner or if the developer has decided to put the air conditioning in for them. I'm not sure what the results are, but as far all that's in writing is the recommendation from the noise study people to suggest that there have to be provision made for air conditioning, and that once there's provision made for air conditioning in each unit, that the owners would have the obligation to put that in for themselves, and that would then make it legal. It's still noisy, but it would make it legal. The final thing that I asked about was whether or not a 10-story building is in keeping with Stratford's character. You're going to decide that, I think, tonight. Maybe for the good, maybe for the bad, I don't know. I do know from where I used to live that once one goes up, every other developer then eyes that as the new base, because it is way cheaper to build tall than it is to build dense. And so where I used to live, a developer got permission from council to go beyond the 8-story zoning limit to 28 stories. And as soon as they did that, every development application along a 2-mile stretch of road was withdrawn, and these were for 8, 10, and 12-story buildings. And instead went in applications for 30, and 40, and 150-story buildings. And the city has had to approve them because they gave permission for the other one. The density is now the minimum. And I just worry that in a already extremely dense application, the addition of a 10-story building gives you much more density, which is, maybe it's density is something that the city is looking for, but a 10-story building may be too much of a temptation for the other developers in this town, and for all, and for BMI, indeed, to not seek as the floor for any further applications, particularly when there's a big piece of land involved. I appreciate the fact that I know that you're dealing with a housing issue in this town, and in all towns in Ontario, all towns in Canada, I think, where there isn't enough to go around. And there isn't enough that's affordable. And the fact that this developer has suggested that they will put in 38 affordable units is huge. I can't say anything bad about that. That's a good thing. It doesn't have to be with a 10-story building. And it doesn't have to be with continuing to consume fossil fuels, both through cars, because they don't have charging stations, and through heating the buildings and the hot water. We in Canada have to stop doing that. And if you allow every developer that comes to Stratford on new land or new development to expand Stratford's use of fossil fuels, you're going to make the problem that much worse to meet the test of Stratford's climate reduction plan. So I thank you. Any questions?
Any questions from council? Thank you very much.